Hi everyone, welcome to our book launch. It's just gone 7, so I think we'll get started now. My name's Jasmine, for those of you who don't know me. I'm from Carrey Press. I'm just going to say a couple of words before we get going. So obviously thank you for being here. We really appreciate your support. Of course, we're here to launch Apocalypse, the new anthology, this amazing new book. I have put the discount code in the chat for you, but we'll cover that again later. So I'm just going to tell you what's going to happen tonight. Basically, Jim Keery, the editor of the book, is here. We'll hear from him in a minute, and he's going to be joined by Poet Laureate Simon Armitage, and we're also joined by Carcanet poet and bookseller John Clegg. John will be chairing this event, and I'm going to hand over to him in a second. But before I do, I just want to point some things out to you, because I know we're still not all quite 100% familiar with the format of Zoom. So obviously we can't see you, you can see us, but please do get involved. We want to hear from you. So if you can find the chat function on your screen, make sure you're clicked on all panelists and attendees so that everyone can see your messages. Say hello to us, let us know what you think of the book and think of the readings and the discussion as we're going through. We'd really like to hear from you. So tonight, this is going to last for probably just over an hour. As I said, in a second, I'm going to disappear. I'm going to hand over to John Clegg, who will introduce Simon and Jim and say a little bit about the book. Then we're going to jump right in. We're going to start with some readings. Now, while the readings are happening, I'm going to show the text on screen so that you can read along with the readers. It's really important for you to know that you're in control of your own screen. So if you do want to see their faces bigger, you should be able to double click on them, or you might be able to drag the corners of the box. It's slightly different for whatever kind of platform you're watching on. So just have a little fiddle and you should be able to configure it to suit your own needs. So we'll have some discussion interspersed with these readings, and later on in the event we're going to take some audience questions. So there is a separate box that is called Q&A. Please also find that. You might need to click on more, but there is a button called Q&A somewhere, and if you can line up some questions in there that John can put to Jim, and Simon's going to chip in throughout the event, we'd really like you to get involved at that stage as well. So the last thing I'm going to tell you is that you need to check your emails tomorrow for the discount code. I'll put it in the chat later on when we're wrapping things up for you, but that will come for you tomorrow. And if you have any problems with the technology throughout the event, pop a little message in the chat and we'll try and help you there. So I think that's enough from me. So without further ado, I'm going to invite John to join us and we'll get going.
Hello everyone, good evening. Welcome to the Apocalypse. It's a real pleasure to be introducing Simon Armitage and Jim Keery. Simon Armitage, of course, doesn't need my introduction. He's the Poet Laureate, as you all know perfectly well. The only job which on your first day when you start you get the sack. He was the Oxford Professor of Poetry from 2015 to 2019. In 2018 he was awarded the Queen's Gold Medal for Poetry. His most recent publication is Magnetic Field, poems from across his career about his hometown of Marsden in West Yorkshire. And it's a treat to have him with us to discuss this lively tome. James Keery is a poet whose most recent collection, I believe, is This Stranger the Blues, and a critic. And in the early years of this century, he published a 12-part series in PN Review called The Burning Baby in the Bathwater, a 12-part series of articles. And it was the most astonishing thing in the world. It was, each month it jumped out at you. It was the best thing in the mag. It was this long re-evaluation of the poetry of the 1940s and the poetry just before and just after it that really, really strongly made the case that we were massively underrating this this period in UK poetry. And I think when that series ended, everybody had the same feeling that it was patently, he should put his money where his mouth was and produce the anthology, which would be the final nail for convincing us of this. And it's taken about 20 years, but that is this anthology. It's it cashes in what he did in those articles in the early 2000s. It's 400 completely remarkable poems that will be new to almost everybody, the majority of them. It's going to absolutely change permanently, I think, the way we think of poetry, the poetry of the 1940s. Now that's enough about this anthology, and in a second I will get on Jim and Simon, but I just want to say what the format of the evening is going to be. It's going to be 3 readings, with us each reading a poem from the book, interspersed with discussions, followed by a Q&A from the audience. So bung us your cues in the Q&A box in the bottom corner of your Zoom screen. And with that, welcome Jim, welcome Simon. Hey there.
Hi. I'm going to begin by reading a poem by Nessie Dunsmuir. Welcome everyone. Thanks to everyone for tuning in. Really appreciate it. Nessie Dunsmuir was the muse and helpmeet of W.S. Graham, but much more than that. He'd met his match. Her only collection is called Nessie Dunsmuir's 10 Poems, and I could have put them all in. This is one of them. Poem. I would have chosen children, the breathing hearth, and made my own ritual in winter, birth and bone. Not this wordy ferment in the fingers, this sailing hunger capsized in the breast. I would have chosen children and roofed with rows of fire their early east.
And here's a poem from Sylvia Townsend Warner, who's perhaps better known as a novelist. It's number 7 from her 12 poems in the Manor of Buick, the artist engraver. I see they have a vine. It's small but genuine. Its leaves can really fall. Its roots are in a small tub that is painted green. They have a dovecot too, and that is painted blue. It's vacant, though commodious, for doves in time grow odious, that shit as well as coo. Further, they have a dump of sand, a stirrup pump, a bucket and a hatchet, and little bags to snatch at, in case of the last trump. O Bacchus, rowdy youth, in whose red cup is truth, O Venus, tranquil nurse of scandal and divorce, inscribe this house for wrath.
Just wanted to say it's really great pleasure to be part of this event tonight. This anthology, with its sort of almost constructivist cover, just absolutely screamed "read me" when it dropped through the letterbox, and just full of amazing discoveries inside. And I wrote to Michael straight away to say how excited I was by the poems, and by finding not just poems but poets I not just that I didn't know about, but I'd never heard of, including Julian Ord. I don't think many people had heard of Julian Ord. She's something of a mystery all around, I think. So this poem is called The Awaiting Adventure. Dear stranger, the mule is loaded. Let us start. A tune of trees is written across the hill, and the sky is high today, and nothing is still. But I feel banners thudding against a wind, a cave of wings rushing over the ground, and the leaping day calling me into love. The expert from the city tunes the trees in far snowfields of sleep we may not cross. The revolving lighthouse is adrift and lost. But oh, I am awake and running down the yellow slopes of my tomorrow's hopes. There is about us more than a man's mind, more than a ship's huge voyaging and end, or the whole brass music of a gallant day. The jet of life has sprung its ecstasy. I am in love with greater than I am, and share the way of stone and star and lamb. And even the central liquid rock moves in me. Always, stranger, let us be setting out, with home not left, but in ourselves always. The eager fabulist of holy orders will log our journey for us in the night, and, if we let him, ride ahead and praise. The hierarchy of mountains does not speak, but the cold flowers, with a different life and in a different time, create and die, familiar with the deathless walls of ice, not seeing their farthest shape against the sky. Stranger, met at last, this great beginning shall swing us through all times and all planes. Though we but walk, are little, and have names, our history is in us, and we in history.
So Gillian Ord was actually another girlfriend of W.S. Graham. Wrote roughly twice as many poems as Nessie Dunsmuir. I think we got to 19. So even if you wanted to publish a collection, you'd hardly get the name on the spine. She was an actress. She wrote a beautiful long poem. Part of it's in a book called Conjurers, about the metamorphosis of a caterpillar. It's terrific, I think. That's a great choice.
Did you know about Julian Ord's poems before you started to assemble the anthology, James, or was it part of the discovery?
I did know about Julian Ord's poems. They're in Poetry Quarterly. She never published a collection, but she published PN Review collected about a dozen. David Wright did a feature in PN Review, but this was years ago, in the 80s, I think, maybe even the 70s. So I'd come across them. The more I read, the more I liked them, and she was a stone ginger like Nessie Dunsmuir for the anthology. There are many more poets that could have been in it, but she was one that would never have missed the cut.
That poem for me, when I first read it in the anthology, had echoes of Robert Graves's poem, The White Goddess.
Yes.
That sort of embarkation poem.
Yeah, I can see that for sure. Graves was huge for all those poets, up to and including Ted Hughes, of course. I mean, if you look at the modernist, who's a modernist and who isn't, and all that kind of, Graves wrote a book called Fairies and Fusiliers in the middle of the First World War, about as unmodest as you can get. And then a few years later writes the Survey of Modernist Poetry, writing about Eliot in 1927 and very brilliantly. And is kind of a talisman for the movement poets. Larkin and Amos thought the world of Graves, but also, of course, feeds directly into Ted Hughes's wilder explorations, and his preposterously huge imagination draws hugely on Graves. I think for all these poets, I can see the link for sure with that greater than I am feel in that poem. Definitely. I mean, it comes from Whitman and right through all that. But she's terrific, I think. I'm just aware that once you stop me, I won't start. So rather the other way around, once you start me, I won't stop.
I'd be interested to hear more about the sort of process of making the selection. It's definitely taken you about 18 years to put the book together, right? And was that,
yeah, well,
and you seem to have read everything in the world.
Yes, I have, John, twice. No, well, Michael asked me to do the book. Michael Schmidt asked me to do the book in 2014. And it obviously I spent a lot of time reading after that. But of course I was drawing on things I did know from, like Burns Singer, for example, I'll be reading a little later on, was a remainder book I got when I was a student and thought was wonderful. So it's things I've known for a long, long time. And also think, you know, what was the last poem? Oh, Patrick Craig. I didn't have any Patrick Craig, but I got a cheap proof copy of Row of Pharaohs from Abe.com and found something that I really, really liked. And I think that went in at a stage where the drawbridge had already come up. Well, that's not the latest ones who went in with the Faber poets, because we didn't get them to the very last minute. And that really did put the cat among the pigeons. The book was improved by that stage, but they let me have them to their eternal credit. So we only had Ted Hughes and Sylvia Plath and Larkin, Kathleen Raine and Sean Jennett. Right.
There's a lot of luck that the book wouldn't be the same without the Hughes and Plath things, I think.
You know, I think they enhanced the book clearly. I mean, you know, you could have Eliot in there, you could have Yeats in there, Cuchulainn Comforted, I would have loved to put in. But I wanted to have everyone, if not at least alive concurrently, you know, if not all writing concurrently. Pretty much all 200 poets are going strong in the mid-40s, a few killed in the war, of course, and a few very young at that date, admittedly. But anybody who'd already checked out by 1939, I didn't include. Plus, Yeats would have cost half the budget. It'd be worth it, wouldn't it?
Could I
That was
ask?
very fun, you know. I've never had so much fun in my life. I've been ransacking everything from secondhand bookshelves to, you know, of course, the collected Ted Hughes, and it's extraordinary what you find.
James, could I ask whether, in your view, it's style or subject that makes a poet apocalyptic?
That's a great question. Apocalyptic poetry. Again, you know, you can define it against things, which I kind of did in saying that there was the ironic modernism from Eliot through Auden, maybe up to the movement, Larkin, and that kind of, you know, decent democratic down-to-earth strain that persists right up to now. And say that romanticism on its high horse is something different. So, but then there's a very down-to-earth strain, well, down-to-earth, there's a very gentle strain in the book of dream poetry. I would say oniric poetry can be apocalyptic too. So it's not a catch-all. I think the poem I used to sort of define, I mean, a wonderful poem. Hughes hated it. Ted Hughes hated it. He's the only person who I know who didn't like Naming of Parts by Henry Reed. But he hated it, and I hated it as a dutiful apocalyptic who felt clearly, you know, this was the stuff he didn't like. It was Hughes who gave perhaps the best account of the movement, the movement coup against the apocalypse, the movement Larkin and Amos coming along and saying, you know, now you're okay, we don't want any more of that. Romanticism on its high horse. Immortality, you know, hope it keeps fine for you. And Hughes got it, but what did he say? He said that after the war, they'd seen apocalyptic sublimity and you know, great imaginative daring end up in death camps and atom bombs, and they didn't want any more of that. And he also gave the best answer, which is that he didn't feel that way. He was all for opening negotiations with anything there might be, from the dark gods to the white goddess. And I'm very much of that mind. Larkin's great lines about the long perspectives open at each instant of our lives. It's a great phrase, but Larkin's is closing them off, you know. We're not suited to those, and don't look down, don't look up, you know, you get vertigo. And of course, Hughes is, again, that huge imagination, isn't having any of that. So it's a style, but I would say J.H. Prynne was an apocalyptic poet. He was, you know, he can consider himself fortunate. He was born in 1936, just a little after the cutoff date for the book. 1932 was the last few poets in it. Whether Prynne would have agreed to be in the book is anybody's guess, but I would have loved, Star Damage at Home. We must have the damage votes, the stars burning their courses. I would have loved to have had Prynne in the book. And there's not much in common between J.H. Prynne and, say, Nessie Dunsmuir or Julian Ord. But there's a visionary modernist quality to them all, I would claim. And that's the basis on which poets are in the book, or not.
Maybe there's a follow-up anthology to be done of the apoplectic poets.
Yeah, well, you could. Oh, yeah. There's a great anthology to be done of all the stuff that the movement poets hated. I mean, they were wonderful. They were Kingsley Amis, Philip Larkin, that jeering. What's the word? They were brilliant Mickey takers, piss takers, and everything from That Was the Week That Was to Kess to Monty Python comes out of that movement spirit, and it's still going strong, but you don't have to jettison everything at which they sneered and jeered and mocked. A lot of it stands the test of time very well, I think, and it's still going strong in contemporary poets, I think. Prynne being one, but there are many more.
Now, speaking about standing the test of time, should we all read another?
But yes, indeed, surely. So, am I to read? I'll read a parable by Donna MacDonagh. Yeah. So Donna MacDonagh's an Irish poet. This poetry can communicate before it's understood. I know this because I still don't understand this poem, but I had a couple of, after I'd chosen it and liked it, there were a couple of facts I gleaned that have some bearing on it. I think it's about Daedalus and Icarus. And of course, in the myth, Icarus comes to grief and Daedalus doesn't. In Donna MacDonagh's case, his father, Thomas MacDonagh, was one of the Irish rebels executed in 1916. So his father came to grief. And the Naiads at the end, his mother drowned when he was, again, also very tiny. He was obviously only 3 when his father died. He was only 4 when his mother drowned, and his wife also drowned. So, I mean, they're light bulb moments, but they leave you in the dark. The poem's still a riddle, and it's called a parable. Envious of the birds, the father gathers wings from the wind, wings from the mind, and feathers limb and thought, until the sky can bear him lightly and lift him above his day. The sun, eye-tethered, runs and cheers the daring conqueror, until his fingers soften in feathers, and his voice becomes a strangled sea call. Then Daedalus and his son rejoice together, while Naiads under wave already weep for the birds that have been men. Oh.
Jim called his poem a riddle, and I think this is a riddle as well, but it's a riddle I'm not much closer to solving. It's a sort of askew creation myth.
That makes sense.
It's I know it was inspired by seeing a painting of Dionysus on a black figure vase in the Munich Museum. Male torso. Before I woke, the customed thews alighted on strangeness, crammed over booms of vine, the once buxom canvas quilled. From his hot nest, before I woke, the snow goose flew in skyward rings, and funneled air that filled my mouth rang with his wing beat. The customed eyes before I woke were glass, a bleating queen whose legs were sheaths of hammered moon-fed swilter pigs. With needle oars they swept her bark through flows of starfruit, dolphins cutting under her eyelids bow blue arcs in air. And the beat of her oars like drums fanned my hushaby head. Before I woke, no savour was, but 3 birds sang that song they piped as girls, of sweetness, golden rinded, and the fountain tree, for mortal grapes cooled in my hands. Then down the quartz-walled galleries of ears I coiled, before I woke. Cymbals clashing, sliced the hill. And there, with bulls, my skew-wigged mother trod her crocus dance around its axle. Counterwheeling horn and bear shared in her coronal the thud of fingertips on flutes until my accustomed silence dipped and rose, and Gaul was mine, and darkness was. I lived now in a hutch of mud, without a floor, nailed by the sun, now for the interminable writhing sea, a fair food housed in roofless marble. But if I wake to sniff the air of clustered stars, I'm clothed in dew, for babes to drink. The snow goose moors her nest on light, and the small horned worms walk high with hope.
I want to read a Lynette Roberts poem, a poem from Llanbree. So apologies, please, to all people from Wales and Welsh speakers while I stumble through some of these mispronunciations. My wife's of Welsh stock, so I've closed the door so she can't hear and cringe. A poem from Llanbree. If you come my way, that is, between now and then, I will offer you a fistful of rock cress fresh from the bank, the valley tips of garlic red with dew, cooler than shallots, a breath you can swank in the village when you come. At noonday, I will offer you a choice bowl of caul served with a lover's spoon and a chopped spray of leeks or savoury vach, not used now, in the old way you'll understand. The din of children singing through the eyelet sheds, ringing smith hoops, chasing the butt of hens. Or I can offer you Cumselin spread with quartz stones from the wild scratchings of men. You will have to go carefully with clogs or thick shoes, for it's treacherous, the fen. The east and west marshes also have bogs. Then I'll do the lights, fill the lamp with oil, get coal from the shed, water from the well, pluck and draw pigeon with crop of green foil. This your good supper from the lime tree fell. I sit by the hearth with blue flames rising, no talk, just to stare at time, gathering healed thoughts, pool insight, like swan sailing peace and sound around the home, offering you a night's rest and my day's energy. You must come, start this pilgrimage. Can you come? Send an ode or elegy in the old way and raise our heritage. I was thinking, not so much with this poem, which is this, really delightful and I think quite romantic invitation. But in some of the other poems that we've been reading, and certainly in a lot of poems in the anthology, there's a strong streak of surrealism and even the Gothic as well, I think, at times.
Agree with that. Well, of course, the male torso is surrealistic. Before I woke, again, nearly all the poems we've read have quoted Dylan Thomas, Here or There. Before I woke, the town spoke. And Nessie Dunsmuir's at it, the capsize, the overturning the whole edifice of male poetry, which we would have chosen children, which is from one of the Dylan Thomas poems, the belittling but also overturning image. I think surrealism's a really strong element. Gascoigne, who's one of the great apocalyptic poets, in you can anthologize Gascoigne completely differently, and people have done, by taking the 30s surrealist poetry, pure surrealism, because he went abroad, met them all, came back, anthologized them when he was a teenager, and took part in the Surrealist exhibition in 1936, and then changed his style completely. That's the point. There are strong surrealist elements in his 40s poetry, but the Wartime Dawn one, which I think is wonderful, you know, the guns on Norway's bitter coast renew fire. It's a completely realistic war poem about a sleepless night and the blackout, but also with a very strong surrealist element in it. I think that's quite right. And that you could say right through to, again, to Prynne, to Michael Haslam, the surrealist elements in poets like that. Crozier, they might not agree with that or see it that way, but I would say so. So I think surrealism lives, you know. Long may it live.
You mentioned Hughes earlier on, and you know, his declaration that, you know, after the war he was still ready to open up negotiations with the darker elements out there, and you know, how he'd seen some of the more urbane poets being ready to put their feet up on the hearth and put their slippers on, but he was still, you know, seeing stormtroopers around every corner. But really interesting in the introduction, James, you pull out all these pre-echoes in Hughes's poems that you've found in other people's work. I'd be really interested to hear more about that.
Well, if you, I mean, the Hawk in the Rain is I mean, it's explosively original stuff. So that, but in a sense, that disguises Dylan and Thomas. The number of parallel phrases with Thomas poems is remarkable. Dylan, Ted Hughes and Sylvia Plath used to play, I forget what the game's called, but you start a line of Shakespeare and the other person finishes it. And they did the same with Dylan Thomas. They both knew him well enough. You'd have to know a poet very well to do that. And Hughes's tutor said that she'd learned more from Ted Hughes about Dylan Thomas than he'd learned from her about John Donne. This was before the movement kicked off. He started as a young apocalyptic and just carried on, completely regardless of fashion. And I think the lineage is more direct in the case of Ted Hughes, even than in some of the other, even perhaps than in W.S. Graham, who begins as maybe a more fervent disciple of Dylan Thomas with the 40 stuff that's almost dismissed. Though again, I think it's wonderful, but there's often a divide in W.S. Graham between his, you know, his apocalyptic phase and then his apocalyptic detoxification, and he became a real poet kind of thing. I don't buy that, but I would say, if anything, Ted Hughes became more apocalyptic as he went on, more kind of, you know, I mean, there's a strong movement element in The Hawk and the Rain and Lupercal. They're well-made poems for the most part, whereas, you know, it all explodes later on, and it's as apocalyptic as it gets. Gaudete, you know, and all those intimate, amazing things, whatever you think of them. I think we could all agree, at the very least, they're intermittently magnificent and amazing. And as I say, apocalyptic to the last degree. I can't remember what the question was.
It was it's based on the idea of not so much the hawk in the rain, but the hawk in the Kathleen rain, I think.
Oh, definitely. Again, Kathleen Rain, you know, it can be presented as a demure, Blakean lyricist who wouldn't harm a fly. And she was a demonic poem. Again, I'd have put dozens of poems by Kathleen, or a dozen poems by Kathleen Rain in the book. That goes for half the contributors. But I mean, the poem in the book about, you know, let anything happen to me if I can just write a poem, you know, all the terrible things she says she'd put up with, being slit across and goodness knows what. And then what is it? A goneril heart? A goneril heart. And that was, of course, about Gavin Williamson. Oops, not Gavin. Gavin Williamson's my boss. Gavin Maxwell. Sorry, Gavin. Gavin Maxwell, the poem about, well, not the poem about, but she cursed him under a rowan tree, his otters died, his house burnt down, he got cancer, and she was understandably dismayed and guilty for the rest of her life. She considered herself a very powerful witch, and obviously was. And of course, she wrote the great book on Blake. So, you know, again, Catherine Rain's collected poems are in print now, but an awful lot of the stuff is missing. A lot of her early, as in, so don't start me on what the collected poems do with their 40s poetry. As often as not, they miss it out completely. And there's more than one that, I think, without naming names, there's several poets who, you know, collected poems 1950 to 19 whatever, you know, and they probably started in the mid-30s. There's one, it's Martin Bell, whose complete poems were given. We're given his complete poems, edited by Peter Porter, including 30s poems. And then we skip to the 50s. And the editor says that he was sent a load of his 40s poems by someone to whom Bell was sending them during the 40s, but he didn't print any of them. And yet he calls the book Complete Poems on the obvious and only premise that, or justification that anything written in the 40s has just got to be rubbish, you know? And any decent editor would draw a veil over it. And to an extraordinary extent, that's what editors did and poets did. I think it's quite okay to, I was very delighted to get permission to print Norman McCade's 40s poetry. I have my fingers crossed that I've been sorry not to be allowed to do so, but I was asked quite reasonably to print a disclaimer saying Norman McCade considered these poems too obscure for publication and had disowned them. So it was, you know, all credit to the estate for giving me permission to print them in the first place.
And the same certainly with Christopher Middleton, who
yes,
the
actual fortune
books.
Yeah, do you know, I've never, I can't get hold of them. Never even read them. I haven't read the two Fortune Press collections.
Look, I'll bung them to you. I've got, I can scan them in. I've got copies.
You're on.
But look, hang on, we'll do this later.
The 40s one I did print, which I really like, is from a little self-published thing later on. It was after those. So the actual Fortune Press collections, I'd love to see. I've never seen a word from. Oh yeah, I did, because Ian Hamilton quoted when he published Torse 3. Ian Hamilton dredged up his apocalyptic collections and hung them out to dry. He quoted a couple of lines, and yeah, they were flagrantly apocalyptic. So I wouldn't mind reading the whole book. You're on.
I have a question. You must have read a load of really bad apocalyptic stuff as well as the good stuff.
Well,
how does the bad stuff tend to fail? What's the sort of vices of it as a style?
Oh, well, that's a very fair question. I mean, I've got, well, more than high tolerance for. I love it, you know, like sugar and Coke and that kind of thing. But you know, they were accused of mixed metaphor, which if you outlaw mixed metaphor, you lose a. My daughter wrote a poem the other day with a mixed metaphor in, and wondered if that was allowed. And my reply was that it would, if it wasn't, it would count out half the poets in the book. One in particular, Madge Hales, mixes her metaphors, whisks them up, flings them all over the page, and the results often, in her case, are, you know, they don't work, but sometimes it does, and when it works, it's great, I think. So yeah, the vices of the style. Oh yeah, I mean, you know, Ian Hamilton again loves to quote dreadful apocalyptic poetry, and Larkin and Amis, they had great crap detectors, these people. The trouble is they gave lots of false positives, and they record something as being rubbish, which isn't, and they didn't discriminate very well between the good and the bad, either in an individual poet or between poets. And what's my favorite bad apocalyptic line? But it's so bad, it's wonderful. Like a gibbet shrieking in my heart. There you are. It always reminds me of Beauty and the Beast, you know, the candlestick, the animated gibbet shrieking in my heart. So, you know, you could edit an anthology of apocalyptic poetry which would fulfill the, you know, the criteria and bear them out in how hysterical, I suppose, what's the word, the foaming horseman, the or all the insulting nonsense that's been trotted out for 60 years. But often by the same poets, often in the same poem, you get something, you know, true. I mean, one of the big problems with the anthology is what to do with a poem in which there's 2 or 3 wonderful lines, and then the rest is either not as good or bloody awful. I quoted a couple in the introduction, the incendiary Finn, you know, and I'd put the whole poem in, except it's dreadful. And on the whole, the poems with just a few good lines in, I look for something else by the same poet. I don't think there's anybody I had to exclude, with the exception perhaps of Kenneth G, who I put in because I put the only 2 lines in the introduction. For the most part, you could get them to write a poem without that didn't, you know, explode or meet with disaster. But yeah, many do. But I mean, what's not to like? You know, a style that explodes all over the place is surely preferable to a dull. I mean, they're really awful poems. A dull movement poem about, you know, what's the Larkin one about wishing Kingsland's daughter would be dull because then she, you know, everything would be fun. Awful. Man, you know, and that's Larkin. I mean, the really dull movement poem, you know.
That's I love that poem.
Oh, well,
tightly folded bud. Tightly folded bud. I wish you something none of the others would.
Yeah, well, that's a curse, isn't it? May you be dull. Come on. I mean,
yeah, the sentiment's terrible, but the construction is impressive.
Poet, you know, again, you could have put, goodness, the North Ship. There's another one that they split. He leads the way, of course, saying the North Ship was wonderful, that was rubbish, the Celtic fever abated, and I became a real poet. The North Ship is magnificent. You know, if you read the North Ship without already knowing that it's rubbish, it's wonderful, I think. And the final poem in it, the one about the grace of inspiration, the deer tenderly cropped, the fallow deer, fallow like a field, or fallow like a deer on unforced field, is one of the best things he ever wrote. But there you are. Oh no, I'm not having.
Now I think we should read one more each and then move over to questions from the audience.
Yeah, sure. Right. I'm going to read Magnifica and Sinner. Well, this is the you know, the full apocalyptic glory, I think. It's obviously Magnificat and the Annunciation from the Bible, the birth of Jesus. There's also a kind of deposition from the cross image at the end. And Burns Singer, when he was very young, his mother committed suicide and he had to take down her body. So again, without explaining this wonderful poem, that has a bearing on it, I think. Magnificat, or from Magnificat. Who then are you, I hazard after? Are you my love who have my love? I cannot yet decipher you nor disprove. Where do you lie? And what between us launches this arrogant atmosphere through which you penetrate like a pointed prayer? I come to you across, I come to you and will be seen, though 5 ambiguous senses blaze between. I come to you across this painful noise of my journey, without a wreath. I bear no grudge, no cargo. I carry death. You will surprise me at the last. We two will meet where no sun warms. I, murder with my body in my arms, and you with me as I at last with you, alive past apprehension, the dizzy annunciation, the slackening tension.
One of the really wonderful things about reading the anthology for me was finding poets who I thought I knew quite well, who it turned out I'd obviously not read at all. This seems to me very, very much the best thing of Norman Cameron's, but I'd never noticed it before. Shepherdess. All day my sheep have mingled with yours. They strayed into your valley seeking a change of ground. Held and bemused with what they and I had found, pastures and wonders. Heedlessly I delayed. Now it is late. The tracks leading home are steep. The stars and landmarks in your country are strange. How can I take my sheep back over the range? Shepherdess, show me now where I may sleep.
If one of the purposes of an anthology is to introduce new poets, other purposes are to reacquaint, and it's also an opportunity for reassessment. And HD is somebody that I've never really got on with. I think it might be to do with not her best work often appearing in anthologies of imagist poetry.
Yeah.
But reading RAF sent me back to several other books, and she's just somebody that I'm reading all the time now. And I think particularly this combination of formalism and fluency across, these chain link couplets of different length, amazing sonics driving this poem. So I think I'm right in saying that some of the voices for this poem were picked up through spiritualism sessions on a table that once belonged to William Morris, seance sessions. So there's a few sections from RAF. 4. He came again, he did not speak. I thought, he stands by my desk in the dark. He is emissary. Maybe he will speak later. Does he still stammer? I remembered how I had thought this field, that meadow, is branded for eternity, whatever becomes of our earth, with the mark of the new cross, the flying shadow of high wings moving over the grass. Fortunately, there was no time for lesser intimacy than this. Instantaneous flash, recognition, premonition, vision. Fortunately, there was no time for the two-edged drawn swords of our two separate twin beings to dull. No danger of rust. The archangel's own fine blade so neatly divided us in the beginning. He was huddled in the opposite corner, bareheaded, curiously slumped forward, as if he were about to fall over. The compartment was crowded. I was facing forward. I said, "Put your feet up here." And I wedged myself tighter and dozed off in the roar and the train rumble. In the train jolt, our knees brushed, and he murmured, "Sorry." He was there. I knew in the half daze, in the drug and drift, the hypnotic sway of the train, that we were very near. We could not have been nearer, and my mind winged away. Our minds are winged, though our feet are clay.
Yeah, how good is that?
Stuff. Now, may we take some questions from the audience? First of all, I have a question from John Keery here. Will the COVID-19 pandemic, which has caused the greatest disruption to life in the UK since World War II, inspire a new generation of apocalypse poets? And if so, can we hope that uplifting work in the spirit of Frida Lofton's The Evacuees, drawing on the best of nature and humanity that the present crisis has brought into focus, will not be eclipsed by more apocalyptic writers?
Oh, that's a good question, isn't it? Well, we could have done without the global advertising campaign, I think. No doubt of course, global events, the apocalypse is not dependent on the Second World War, but it's a huge part of it. It was a huge stimulus to it. It's a huge part of its imagery and the experience of the poets writing in that style. And no doubt that'll be true of the of the contemporary poets going through this, you know. Goodness only knows what poets will make of it, but 50 years' time, there'll be a great anthology to make, I'm sure. We'll be around to edit it.
A question from Kitty Diffley. Would you say that the sensation of Apocalypse is born of the loss of a love, whether that's the love of life or love of someone else? And if so, how does the anthology sort of explore that?
That's a really good question. I think there are love poems in the anthology. Apocalyptic poetry is often, what's so serious, there's no word for it, is it sublime, dealing with those long perspectives, and an immediate human experience can go out of focus. I don't think it has to. When you read Shepherdess, there's a, you know, it's a dreamy, but I would say it wasn't an apocalyptic poem. It's a wonderful love poem. And there are many more in the book. The Magnifica, the poem I read by Bernstein, is a love poem. A love of whom exactly? I'm not sure. It really is one of the strangest poems I know. And I think that's true of apocalyptic poetry in general. It can, you know, the decent, the democratic, the down to earth, the movement poetry, and I'm not limiting movement poetry to that. It has many other great qualities, but it can be shot through with dimensions that are anything from strange and disturbing to downright mystical. And that's what I like about apocalyptic poetry. It covers those. It goes, you know, not swinging along those long perspectives like a monkey in a rainforest as though we're comfortable on them. They are, you know, one can share Larkin's feeling. Oh, don't look down, don't look up. You know, death, vertigo, and terror and fear. Or you can be more open to contemplating those things without being blasé about them. And I think apocalyptic poetry, the word I come back to, is open. It opens perspectives. As Larkin says, they are, but then takes cover from them and runs and hides. And that seems to me a shame.
Here's a question on a similar topic from Michael S. in Manchester. You talk about Hughes's movement away from the apocalyptic, but isn't the same true with George Barker and with Graham? Isn't there a case that Apocalypse is a sort of crucial starting point, and the trajectory of the best poets is a recovery from it?
Well, there's a case, of course. The case, I mean, really, that's very much the case that's been made for 60 years. You know, that apocalypticism is something you needed to detox from to become a real poet. And the poets in, I mean, the apocalyptic anthologies include as many great poets: McCaig, Dylan Thomas, Vernon Watkins, to go no farther or lower, if you like, as the movement anthologies or any other movement. But what they do with the apocalyptic is dissociate them from it. So McCaig disowned his own poetry. Dylan Thomas never signed the manifesto, you know, as if to be a member of a poetic movement, you have to have pledged Bruderschaft, which is ridiculous. It would thin the ranks of any movement if people had to sign up to it and commit to every article. There was a movement. There was also a much broader, you know, cultural feel or tone, experience, and no, far from outgrowing it or improving beyond it. I don't see that at all. I don't see the improvement in W.S. Graham from The Night Fishing, which was written in the 40s. You know, if you're going to split him into early and late, you can't have The Night Fishing. And it's a wonderful poem. But I don't see that the apocalyptic poems improved. Did Barker improve on The True Confession of George Barker, which is 40s? There's lots of wonderful late Barker, but I certainly don't see absolute improvement from his early, you know, apocalyptic apprenticeship. That's right. Don't start me on all this prentice poetry stuff. McCaig's 240s collections are dismissed as prentice work. It's the trademark movement cop-out for early stuff they want to disown. McCaig was in his mid-30s when he wrote those books. It's not customary to complete your apprenticeship in your mid-30s. He was born in 1910. There's a poem in the book from 1934, let alone the 40s. So you know, I mean, of course, there's a case being made. The case has been made. You know, most editors of most poets who committed the indiscretion of writing during the 40s find some version of that case to apologize for their apocalyptic poetry. It just seems to me completely unnecessary. It's a selling point.
Rosie Goldsmith asks, is there such a thing as a European anthology of apocalyptic poetry? Is it a European-wide movement?
Oh, that's a great question. I think absolutely it is, and it's something that I was finding more and more. Yes, I mean, specifically there's an anthology called Menschheitsdämmerung, a German anthology, but I don't know if it's got other European, it's got German poets in it. I don't know, no, it's not European wide. So no, I mean, poets like Celan, you know, classically would be an apocalyptic poet for me. And again, did Celan improve through the 50s poetry, the 60s poetry? Yeah, as poets do, but certainly very much an apocalyptic poetry from start to finish. The Gascoigne considers himself more European poet than an English one, and quite right too. There is that visionary modernist tradition through modern French and German poetry, which never got attacked and sneered at to the same extent. The kind of backlash was very much homegrown, and you know, again, as I say, very powerful. Larkin and Amis are wonderful, but you don't have to, you know, jettison everything that they jettisoned. You don't have to live without everything they couldn't stand. There's a wonderful Mickey take of Kingsley Amis about what's bad's what I say Lucky Jim can't stand, and that's very much the case. What Lucky Jim couldn't stand, it wasn't cool to like for about 50 years. Somebody said it's safe to sneer at Dylan Thomas, and there's no question about that. So the European dimension, again, you know, there's a lot of very solemn, very, very, what's the word, very pompous, very high flown, apocalyptic in all the bad senses, I think, but also lots of wonderful stuff. I couldn't do it, but it'd be very cool to do an anthology of apocalyptic European poetry, I think. I could start you off, but I don't know the literatures nearly well enough.
There's a few questions that I'm going to run into one. Just various questions asking about particular poets and how you would fit them into this framework. Hugh MacDiarmid, David Jones, George Ferris.
Hugh MacDiarmid's in the book. David Jones are in the book. MacDiarmid's.
I'd forgotten that David Jones was in the book, but that is such an astonishing bit.
Oh, yeah.
That knocked my socks off. What a treat to see that. I'd never come across it before.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I would have loved to put much more. Again, I've said it about almost every poet, and it's true. I had a long selection of David Jones at one point before poets kept turning up, and other poets had to get other poems by the poets that were included had to get the elbow. I cut down the number of poems per poet constantly as I went on. So MacDiarmid, Jones, I would certainly say so. Did you say Sepharis? Who was the third one you mentioned?
Yes, Sepharis.
Well, I mean, it's a British anthology, but you could certainly include Sepharis. I would quite agree. I mean, again, there's half a dozen Greek poets. There was a lot of crossover between the personal landscape poets, Durrell, and several other poets who aren't, Dorian Cook, who are in the book, and the contemporary Greek poets of whom Sepharis was one. So you could, you know, he would be in your anthology of European modernists.
Now, I'll just go for one last question, and then we'll wrap things up. A question from Jeremy Noel Todd. Did the apocalypse go to America in the 50s? Do Robert Lowell count? Does Allen Ginsberg count? Is there an American apocalyptic movement?
I think there's an American apocalyptic movement, but then there was Hart Crane, who feeds very strongly into Dylan Thomas. Dylan Thomas claimed not to have read Hart Crane, but I mean, I'm not having any of that. You only have to read both to realise that that's not the case. Hart Crane is an apocalyptic poet, little before the starting gun went off, you know. But Dylan Thomas John Berryman came over in the 30s. He was at Cambridge in the 30s, met Dylan Thomas. Again, disclaims the influence, but I think I quote the lines from Homage to Mr. Bradstreet in the introduction, which are just a pure Dylan Thomas. Yeah, Lowell for sure, although Lowell was taking from Alan Tate and other. The Americans, there's a huge amount of crossover, I think. I don't think it's that we exported apocalyptic poetry. I think it's much more mutual than that. You know, that interferentiality is going on the whole time. Certainly, there are poets like Jean Garrigue. There are many. Delmore Schwartz has absolutely pure. Carl Shapiro. I mean, they are, you know, all but pastiching Dylan Thomas at times in their work, and sometimes very well. So again, you get the whole range of just people copying the style as they were copying Auden at the same time, and others taking it and doing things with it. Often really impressed. Derek Walcott had an hysterical Dylan Thomas phase very early on, and you can see it running through, I think. So yeah, and again, American Apocalyptic Anthology would be you know, put me down for a copy.
Jim, Simon, thank you so much for all this. I think we're going to have to wrap up. But Jim, I know you wanted to read one last poem.
Yeah, blink and you'll miss it.
One of Sean's.
This is by Sean Rafferty, who again, I suppose he's still counted an obscure poet. There's a collection of poems edited by Nicholas Johnson, which started him writing again after 30 years of silence. And he had a late great phase. He thought the world of Nicholas Johnson. He had not fans, but very warm supporters in Ted Hughes and Michael and Claire Morpurgo, who lived close by him in Devon, but still counts as a fairly unknown poet, I suppose. This is, I think, the 40s poetry in the book is wonderful. This is a 70s quatrain reflecting on 30 years of silence and one of a number of encounters with the page during that long, dry phase. The candle's yawning and the fire gone out. Just makes a nice curtain call, I think. The candle's yawning and the fire gone out. Silence your sin. Let silence make amends. You will not write a line, and if you wrote, what would you write but epitaphs and ends?
Jim, Simon, thank you so much for that. That was marvelous. That was the stuff.
It was a pleasure.
We should smash a bottle against the book to declare it fully launched.
Yeah, you're wrong.
We could smash this book against a bottle.
That's a good idea too.
I think so, yeah.
Thank you guys so much. This was honestly such a pleasure. It was so good to hear you talk about those poets and those poems, Jim. And thank you, John, for chairing, and thank you, Simon, for taking part and reading, all of you. It's been a real pleasure. So thanks to everyone who's been here. We really appreciate your support. Like I said, check your emails tomorrow for the discount code. I'm not going to put it in the chat because I can see all your messages coming in. Thanks for keeping in touch throughout the event. So yeah, just let me know if you've got any problems. You can email me. But definitely go and buy this book and read it and tell all your friends about it for sure. So I'm going to leave the room open for a second, just so you can get your final messages in the chat. But that's everything from us tonight. Check our website for our next event, because we'll be back very, very soon to launch GC Waldrop's new collection, and details are coming soon. So just thank you all so much again, and congratulations, Jim. This is a really excellent book, and it was great to be part of it tonight.
It was a real pleasure. Cheers.